Hi, my name's Gareth, and I'm coming over from Sheffield. I did stay at the Grand. I watched the first half in the cabaret ballroom, which was a very surreal experience. There we go. So I'm very pleased to be able to share with you some experiences from Regather. So a worker cooperative was set up in 2010. I'm just going to, a bit of a timeline. I'm going to share some inspirations, some challenges that we've faced, and tell you a bit about what we've done, and maybe you can take away a certain perspective on cooperative enterprise, which is a particularly unique form of enterprise that really sort of is values-based, draws on cooperative principles, and is all about community ownership and management. Can everyone see all right? Yeah. So the timeline starts with an essay, quite randomly in the scheme of things. I wrote a short essay doing some postgraduate study, and it's in 2001. I wrote about developing a website that involved bringing groups of people together so they could share videos and pictures and maybe communicate to each other easily. And if only I'd known what it was I was talking about, I might have invented Facebook or something like that, who knows. I didn't know, and it taught me a useful lesson that you can have the ideas, but the timing and the context and the environment in which you have those ideas is critical, because it's a larger number of factors that determine actually whether that good idea becomes a reality. Fast forward a little bit, and I set up as a sole trader in 2005 as an events organiser. That's my trade, if you like, as an events manager. And my first sort of taste of that was at the age of 16, running a party in my mum and dad's back garden. And there were so many people that came along to it for a New Year's Eve party that we had to lock the garden gate. That kind of, I got bitten by this events bug. But doing that work, mainly for voluntary community sector organisations, led me to understand that people wanted something a little bit more than just a paid consultant doing events management for them. They wanted something that they could buy into, that they could hold accountable, that they could maybe see the proceeds of their money going back into their community and not just a single consultant type figure. And that's where the idea of setting up a co-op came into play. We moved to our premises in Hornhandle Works, which I'll show you a couple of pictures of shortly. 2014 we set up a sister charity, enabling our charitable purpose work to kind of sit alongside the enterprise activity, and that was a useful lesson. We started with the enterprise and then worked back to the charitable purpose. And I know actually for a large number of organisations currently it's the other way around. People are starting with the charitable purpose and now scratching their heads as to how to generate revenue. And not by design, but we did it around the other way. Regather Works in 2015, we essentially got our branding sorted out and developed ourselves as a venue and a food hub, positioned Regather in that way. And then 2016 up to the sort of current day, we've just seen a substantial growth in our trading activities. So we're turning over just over £200,000 a year now, employing 8 people on a part-time or full-time basis. We've been through the pain of VAT registration. We've been through the whole pain of getting the account system up to a certain quality and standard. And much more recently, our work is geared up around the wider urban food system of Sheffield. And that's really about a process of us understanding exactly what it is we were able to achieve and how it is we might go about doing that. So this is Hornhandle Works, and it's an old works building, part of the Little Mesters tradition in Sheffield. So this is where the production of tool and metal trades was organised, and the labour and the production of tools and metal products were organised around the city. Hornhandle Works we made handles out of horn. That's why we're called Horn Handle Works. Okay, so any kind of natural material, bone, antler, ivory, wood. This building was a really important part of that Little Mesters tradition. So products would move around the city into specialised workshops. For us, that's been a really kind of rich narrative for us to learn about the history of the city and also how it is that labour was organised. And also, from our purposes, we are basically Little Mesters, but instead of making tools and metal products, we make food and drink and events, and do that in a post-industrial context. That's the building now, so that's the entrance to our event space, which is upstairs. We've got a shop front that just gives a nice kind of welcoming, public-facing look. You can't see it, but down the left-hand side there's about sort of, five-a-side football pitch-sized area of green space, which we've developed as an edible landscape. So fruit trees, raised beds, all sorts of edible plants. And we put the bike racks in. We've got the single yellow line painted to stop our forecourt being a car park. We just took over the place, really. We don't own it, we've rented it. I don't know if we'd ever buy it. It's 3 buildings combined into one, and it's listed, and it's got all sorts of constraints. We've had to put in 7 doorways since being there, which don't tell the landlord anyway. Okay, so a bit about our vision. So we set out very early on in our existence to create a mutual local economy. Now, if you'd asked me what I meant by that, for about the first 4 years, I've said I'm not really sure yet, but we like the sound of it. We like the sound of a mutual local economy. After a while, we started to get to grips with actually what that might mean, and also understanding about our cooperative kind of foundations. And what we've observed more recently, certainly over the past 2 years, is that what we were talking about when we thought, mutual local economy, that sounds good, has now become something that's more broadly known as community wealth building. And this is all about cooperative, community-owned, community-managed enterprise, particularly working with anchor institutions, so larger organisations within a local economy setting, but also trying to preserve some of the connections with local people through not just jobs, but actual ownership and governance, and maybe more sophisticated versions of share holdings and community returns on investment. Cooperative purpose, we kind of stick to this. You won't find an About Us page on our website because we've constantly evolved, and we found ourselves writing something and then thinking, that's gone out of date, let's do something different. So we kind of stick to a very generic, open-ended purpose, if you like, from a cooperative point of view. And it is all about that context, that environment, and that creating the opportunity for people to do what it is that they want to do. And principally, that's about meaningful employment. So giving people the opportunity and the resource to create their own work. And that's what we've done at Regather collectively. So I've got a few pictures in between the slides so that I don't bore you to death. But this is a group. We did some gardening on the community green space, and it's just a nice example of how we do bring people together to work on collective projects. A lot of text on this slide here, but the key thing is that top bullet point there, the relief of unemployment. So when we set that sister charity up in 2014, one of the main challenges for us was about enterprise sustainability. We weren't making enough money to pay people's wages and the rent and everything. We weren't grant funded. We've never received more than £25,000 at any one point, and we've only done that once. Okay, so everything that we've done has been sort of self-financed by revenue generation and borrowing through very closed community circles, and that's very typical of a small business. So we sort of don't think we're any different in some respects to a small business. But when we set up the charity, we did have to scrutinise what we were doing. What is the actual charitable purpose of Regather? And that's where we ended up with the relief of unemployment, which is the kind of the flip side of creating meaningful employment. Yeah? And the sort of sub-clauses there, well, talking to the Charity Commission, you know, they wanted us to really actually pin down what it was we do in order to achieve that. So provision of workspace, training and advice, and community facilities. And I love this one, in the interest of social welfare. I mean, that is exceptionally broad. It's worth saying that the charity doesn't turn over large sums of money. It just sits there really as the way in which we kind of stay disciplined in relation to our charitable purpose activity. Because it's very difficult propping up these sorts of activities with an enterprise that has to generate income, cover costs, and ultimately, in the future, present an investable proposition. Yeah? So something that people in the community might say, okay, I will put my 500 or £1,000 of savings into a co-op rather than a pension scheme or a very low interest savings account with the bank, or maybe just keeping it as cash under the mattress. You know, we need to create that investable proposition. And charitable purpose work doesn't always support that investable proposition. There's a bread making workshop. We have a little kitchen, and there's some lovely tasty bread that we make there. Okay. Very small text, sorry I should have split it into 2 slides, but this is an overview of what we do. So local food and drink, events and festivals, and I mentioned about the urban food system. So in terms of food and drink, these are revenue generating trading activities. So these are things that we make and we sell to people and they pay us. It's not grant funded, it's not public sector commissioning or anything like that. Okay, so we have a fruit and veg box, 250 weekly customers. We're the largest buyer of local grown produce in Sheffield, so we buy significantly more than anyone else currently, and we're looking to extend that production, more on that later. We operate a microbrewery, so we are, I think micro is a bit generous actually, nano might be more suitable. So about 100 litres, yeah, once or twice a week, and that enables us to produce beer that goes into our venue and the bar in our venue. It's not a huge money spinner by any stretch, but very importantly, it does broaden our product range and it gives something else for people to kind of associate with Regather, which is very important. We have a kitchen facility, we incubate small food businesses, and we're going to specialise that facility to become a bakery in the next year or so. And we've seen examples of small food businesses come and go with that stepping stone from the home kitchen to their own premises, and that enables people to kind of make that progression. We're taking on 15 acres of market garden. Well, I say market garden, it's a bare field at the moment, but it will be a market garden, and that will expand our growing activity. So that's a big new development for us, very exciting. And essentially, it's about getting produce grown locally into the box. So we'll double the size of the growing conducted in Sheffield by that 15-acre field. So that gives you an idea of the existing scale and what it is we're going to be doing next. We'll also be planting orchards, and this year we're working with an existing apple grower, and we'll be taking all of their seconds and turning that into cider. So we'll be looking at somewhere between 400 and 600 kilos of fruit and producing cider with that. So quite exciting. Events and festivals, that was the kind of engine room of the enterprise to start with. And that, as I mentioned, that was my trade as an event organiser. More recently though, we see events as the platform on which to attract audiences to Regather. So they are an integral part of our marketing strategy. And obviously with food and drink and music and other forms of if you like, attractions and content, we can bring more audiences in, and that gives us a better opportunity to tell people about Regather and the products that we sell. The folk forest, That's not this weekend, but next weekend. That's our biggest event of the year. So we'll be inviting anywhere between sort of 6,000 and 8,000 people to a local park. 4 music stages, 3 bars, lots of hot food concessions, loads of activities for children, young people, a heritage crafts area, a whole bunch of stuff. But that's a like standalone brand, if you like. That's Regather trading as the Folk Forest. So have a look on the internet if that's of interest. And then the Transforming Food for Sheffield. So this came out of our work around developing the local economy. And very briefly, we looked at various sectors, community energy, we looked at local money supply, so we thought about alternative currencies and local banking, and we also looked at food. And in the end, we decided to go with food. It had the best fit with our existing trading activities. It had the lowest barriers to entry, if you like. Yeah, I don't know about anyone, but I wouldn't like to try and have a go at banking just yet. So, money supply, that's a tricky one. Okay, so we thought food, let's demonstrate our model, this community wealth building model, through a sector that's actually very accessible in terms of, we all eat 3 times a day, and people are facing major challenges in their lives around food, whether that's affordability or the type of food they're eating and the consequences it has on their health. Okay, so there's all sorts of interactions that food becomes an instrument for something much bigger and much more fundamental. There's a big agenda in Sheffield called the Outdoor City. Have a look at it if you've not heard of it. But it's a big marketing strategy, very, very fundamental to the economy. How long have I got? Keep going. Great. Okay. Also, basically, what we're working towards, this investable proposition, is about creating a cooperatively owned enterprise that enables us to do a community share issue. So this is something that's happened a few times in Sheffield successfully, but we're looking at it primarily around local food production. Another picture. So this is some of the Regather gang. This is Clem, and this is Andrea, and this is Fran. Fran's our box manager. She's a full-time employee. Andrea and Clem came to Regather through the European Volunteering Service programme. So we've hosted 3 people from different parts of Europe for 12 months. We're on our 4th round, and they bring a fantastic capacity and amazing kind of character to the whole organisation. Clem is now a part-time employee, lives in Sheffield, and has decided not to go back to France. Andrea, he went back to Italy, because that's kind of how it is with men and Italy. This is some of the box team as well. That's Doug. He's our apprentice grower now. He'll be developing the market gardens activity. That's Darren, local volunteer. That's Dan, who is our brewer, bar manager. He delivers our box on an electric trike to 30 addresses very locally to Regather. And then that's Shafak, and he's also a member of the EVS team a couple of years ago. And that's a beautiful picture of our fruit and veg box. And we took a lot of time to do this particular photo shoot. We did it at a time of year where all of that produce is Sheffield grown. Obviously that doesn't happen year round, it's very seasonal, but it just shows actually what can be done in a northern city, with the right growing conditions, the right skills, the right techniques, and the right market. Because there's no point growing it if people aren't buying it. Okay, there's some bottles of our beer, we're very proud of that picture. So that's what we aspire to, more of that. A few things about inspiration. So, in terms of influences, what all of these share in common is working with other people, or doing things with other people. That sort of sense of sort of communal experience in various different ways. And that, personally speaking, that was a really important part of deciding to set up a co-op rather than a company limited by guarantee or a KIP or a charity. It was all about that sense of purpose. Don't know if this term's part of the sort of Scarborough, local lingo, but it's big in Sheffield, the precariat. So this is precarious workers, zero-hour contract, part-time, volunteer. So that portfolio existence, the gig economy is the other term that gets used a lot in the mainstream press. And so the idea behind Regather was to address that as an emerging phenomenon, and helping people in that position. I've mentioned this about switching from being a company to a co-op, responding to people's thoughts there. Similarly, the values proposition, that's what drives our customers to us, is a values proposition. And so, all the food that we're offering, isn't just organic. It's not just locally grown. It represents, from their point of view, how it is they want to live their lives. And the big question for us now, and we know this is an issue, is affordability. So we're seeing, we call it commodity gentrification. It's basically stuff getting more expensive just because it's like in fashion or trendy or has a values proposition attached to it. And the big thing for us now is about challenging the basic kind of affordability of that. And we want to do that through an economic approach. So rather than saying people need handouts to afford these things, we want to create the employment that gives them the ability to afford these things. And possibly to make them cheaper, because we get the economies of scale as well. So it's a much broader value-based proposition. The point I'm making here about love at second sight, I suppose the first interaction I had with co-ops as a social movement, I've got to say I wasn't that impressed. I met a group of people that happened to be in Leamington Spa, which if you've ever been to Leamington, it's a bit like Brighton. It's got this kind of little enclave of, hippie, sort of, those very middle class kind of activities. And I just thought, Christ, that really isn't me. I'm much more DIY, I've got hands-on, it needs to be accessible. And that kind of made me think, I'm not too sure about that. The second time around, it was a very different experience. It was part of a broader program of training and capacity building, much more kind of vocational approach, I suppose. And that is, it's going back to that original point about environment, about context, about situation. You can have a great idea, but if you don't find yourself in that right situation, then it won't flourish. And the whole thing then, as far as that cooperative approach is concerned, the key thing is that it hardwires that mutuality into the business model. So you have to be accountable to your members. You have to think about redistribution of profit to that membership. And you've got to think about the enterprise viability, because it isn't that kind of grant dependent. Big challenges then. I used to lecture, sorry, because I can talk for hours. So if you want me to stop, just tell me, because there's other things. There's lots of big challenges. So the first point here about, we made a model out of not knowing what we wanted to do. I'll let that sink in. It's very counterintuitive, but we basically said, we're not sure what we want to do. And there's this kind of emphasis on the business plan, on the work out what you've got to do, decide what you're doing, and then do it. And we found that incredibly restrictive. And had we done that, we would not be where we are today. Absolutely not. We're just writing our first business plan. And the only reason we're doing that is because, well, we've got to. And you're right, don't do it. Don't pin it down. The only reason we're doing it, and we're doing it willingly, is because we're now accessing finance at a level that needs to be held accountable, if you like, in a different way to what we've been able to do it previously. So it cuts both ways. Yeah. But it's very important to be able to adapt, and that was the big challenge for us, was adapting the co-op. So for like 18 months, we ran an early years childcare provision. Is anyone involved in childcare? So you'll know just how challenging that regulatory environment is. Ofsted regulation, all the health and safety requirements, the safeguarding requirements. And so we were responding to a group of single mums who came to us saying, we want provision that is alternative, that is different to the mainstream. So Steiner, Waldorf, Montessori, Forest School-led type provision. And they saw us as a suitable host for that. And we said, okay, from an enterprise point of view, that gives us daytime use of our facilities. So it's a good business proposition in that sense. But we had to adapt. And in the end, we couldn't adapt. It nearly broke Regather, Ofsted, and all of the stuff that is required. So the big challenge there was about adapting the enterprise to a particular idea. And it will only bend so much until it snaps. So this one here, doing something difficult, doing it differently, and doing it well. I call it the triple whammy. Okay, and so a lot of the challenges, if you're socially motivated to go about doing things in the they're very, very difficult challenges to surmount. Capitalism is failing to deal with most of these issues. Yeah, they're a product of a lot of those systems, and so they can't fix it. So it's about recognising just how difficult some of these challenges are. Also, you might go about doing things differently to the mainstream. Thinking about alternative ways, a bit lateral thinking, approaches that are outside of the mainstream. And you've got to do it well. Okay, you've got to do it to a certain standard of quality, because if you fail, and inevitably you will at some point or another, and we have along the way, if you do that, and you fail, then basically what people would point at is that you did it differently. And they'll say, you didn't work, you weren't successful because you were doing it differently. What you need to do is do it more like us, more like the mainstream. Don't try and do it differently. And actually, it's because what we're doing is bloody difficult. Yeah? So it's the triple whammy. You've got to do all three of those things all at the same time. And that's obviously a massive challenge. But it's really important to keep quality at the sort of, the front, the priority in amongst all of that. Because if that lapses, then it's much harder to say, well, actually, we were doing it well and it's difficult and that's why we failed. Not because we're just, doing it differently. So it's a dynamic that needs to be considered. Obviously, I think everyone in the room is understanding the big issues around sustainability and commercial versus social pressures. So I'll move on from that. Thinking about the types of premises, this is an absolutely amazing facility here. It's just, you want to come and see Regather and what we make do with. It's an old, listed, inefficient building. It was about falling in love with that building, the narrative that it presented. But then we had to think about how we could get out of that building. We're still dealing with that. Managed growth versus unmanaged growth. Big deal there is that kind of the success. When you encounter success and things start growing very quickly, managing that is actually really challenging. And from our point of view, it was about trying to create managed growth rather than unmanaged growth. So things like run away from you, that can be as challenging as trying to get things going in the first place. So really big challenge. This one, who's like a founder of an organisation? Anyone here has actually set up the organisation they're employed in? A couple of people. Okay, yeah, great. Okay. So I don't know if you've been
employed a volunteer, so I set it up.
Great. Okay, yeah, super. So this, for me, because I set Regather up, it was my wife described Regather as my first child. I've got two others now, so it's slightly less of a distraction. But this thing, founder syndrome, is really a big challenge. So if you find yourself in that position where you've set something up, you need to be aware at some point or another you will be the bottleneck, and it'll be you that becomes that limiting factor. And the founder syndrome is where you lock into that role, and that then becomes the point at which everything starts failing. And you've got to kind of break out of that cycle. You've got to employ people or find volunteers that are better than you at doing what it is you can't do, or you don't have the time to do. And that's a really, that's a big challenge, particularly if you're very, very passionate about something, or you've spent a lot of your life actually making something happen. But I worked with other people and had to, really had to listen to them to sort of diagnose that, if you like, and then find a cure. And it's only because we did that about 2 or 3 years ago that we are where we are now, because it got to that crux of an issue. And then the final point, really always plan for success. It sounds a bit cliche, doesn't it? But having lived through that, you kind of, the hand to mouth and, are we going to succeed? Yes, is always the answer. And plan for that success. Otherwise, you'll find yourself kind of going back, saying, "Oh, if only we'd done it like that." And we're continuing, to do that, but we're getting better at not doing it. Our website's a good example. Don't build a box delivery system around 1 day a week. Build it around 7 days a week, because that's how many days of the week there are, probably. But always plan for success and think about the future. And that's the end. That's me. I'm done. All right.